The afternoon sun was sliding behind the tall buildings when the boy reached the steps of the grand music hall. He stood there for a moment, staring up at the huge doors as people dressed in fine clothes walked in and out. He tried to keep his breathing calm, but his hands were shaking a little. He had never been inside a place like this. He had only seen it from far away when he passed by on his way home from school, or when he walked around the city searching for old newspapers to sell. He adjusted the small backpack hanging from one shoulder. Inside it, he kept a small notebook filled with scribbles of tunes he had made on the old broken piano back home. The piano wasn't even his. It had been left behind in an abandoned community room near the housing blocks. Many keys were missing, some strings were broken, and the body of the piano was covered in scratches. Still, it made enough sound for him to learn. It wasn't much, but it was the only thing he had. He took a deep breath and stepped inside the music hall. The hallway was bright and clean, with shiny floors and tall walls lined with posters of famous musicians. His shoes made soft taps as he walked to the front desk. A few people waiting nearby turned to look at him. Maybe it was the way he dressed, or maybe it was the old backpack. Whatever the reason, their eyes made him uncomfortable. Still, he didn't stop. He had come too far to turn around now. At the front desk, a woman in a neat uniform glanced up from her computer. She looked him over from head to toe before asking, "Can I help you?" Her voice was polite, but there was something sharp behind it, something that told him she didn't expect him to belong here. He swallowed and nodded. I wanted to ask if I can try the piano inside the hall." Just for a moment. Her eyebrows rose, not in surprise, but amusement. "The piano? You mean the concert piano? The one on stage?" He nodded again. A small laugh escaped her. She didn't try to hide it. "That piano is only for performers. You can't just walk in and ask to play it." People around them were listening now. A few whispers floated through the air. Someone shook their head. Someone else chuckled softly. The boy lowered his eyes for a moment, but he didn't back away. "I understand. I just want to touch the keys. Only once. I won't take long." Before the woman could say anything else, a man wearing a badge that said manager walked over. He looked older, with a firm face and a serious walk. "What's going on?" he asked. The woman explained with a small smile, as if telling a joke. "He wants to play the grand piano." The manager let out a short laugh, louder and not as friendly. "Play? Son, that piano costs more than this whole building's roof repairs." "It's not a toy. I'm not here to play with it," the boy answered softly. "I just want to try it." The manager crossed his arms. "Listen, this hall is preparing for a rehearsal. Professional musicians are here. You can't be wandering around asking to play the stage piano. You don't belong there." The words hit him hard, but he stood still. He had heard this many times in his life, at school, in shops, at parks. People always told him where he didn't belong. But this time, he didn't want to walk away. A group of musicians nearby had heard the conversation. One of them, a tall man carrying a violin case, laughed under his breath. "Maybe he'll play better than half the students we teach," he joked to his friend. They both laughed. The boy's face warmed with embarrassment, but he didn't look away. A stagehand carrying cables and tools walked past and stopped. He had a tired face, but kind eyes. "What's happening?" he asked, sensing tension. "This kid thinks he can play the grand piano," the manager said. "We're telling him that's not possible." The stagehand looked at the boy again, this time carefully. "Do you know how to play?" he asked gently. The boy hesitated, then nodded. "A little. Where did you learn?" He lowered his eyes. "On an old piano. It's broken. Most of it doesn't work. But I practice every day." A few people snorted. Someone said, "A broken piano? That's all you need to know." The boy felt his throat tighten, but he pushed through. "It's the only one I have. I just want to hear what a real piano sounds like when I play." The stagehand studied him for another moment. There was something honest about the boy's voice, something steady despite the embarrassment. "Let him try," the stagehand said quietly. The manager frowned. "No, absolutely not. We don't have time for this." "It'll take 1 minute," the stagehand said. "He came all this way. What harm is there?" The manager shook his head. "If something happens to that piano, nothing will happen," the stagehand said. "I'll watch him." Then he turned to the boy. "You won't touch anything else. Just the piano. Promise?" The boy nodded instantly. "I promise." More people gathered now, whispering and watching. The idea of letting a boy from the street sit at the concert piano had become entertainment for some of them. A few were curious. A few were amused. A few thought it was all ridiculous. But the stagehand pushed open the doors to the main hall and motioned for the boy to follow. The hall was huge. The light from the chandeliers reflected off the polished wooden seats. The air felt colder inside, and every sound echoed softly. At the front of the stage sat the grand piano, black, shiny, perfect. The boy froze when he saw it. It looked nothing like the one he practiced on. His piano, back home, had chipped keys and a cracked frame. This one looked like it held the whole world inside it. "Go on," the stagehand whispered. The boy walked slowly toward the stage, aware that dozens of eyes were watching him. Every step felt heavier. He could hear people whispering again, some laughing, some doubtful, some curious. He tried not to listen. When he reached the piano bench, he placed his hand on the edge of the instrument. The smooth wood felt cold and clean. His heart beat faster. He had dreamed of this moment more times than he could count. "Sit," the stagehand said. The boy sat down, adjusting his position the way he always did at home. His feet barely touched the floor, but he sat tall. He placed his fingers above the keys, but didn't touch them yet. "Whenever you're ready," the stagehand said gently. The manager stood off to the side with his arms crossed, ready to be proven right. The musicians waited with half smiles, expecting mistakes. A few people pulled out their phones, thinking it would be funny to record. The boy closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw the broken piano back home. He heard the dull, uneven sounds it made. He remembered how many times he had wished it could sound like a real instrument. Now he was here. This moment mattered. He couldn't waste it. He opened his eyes and placed his fingers lightly on the keys. The hall fell silent. He pressed the first note. The sound was soft, warm, rich. Nothing like the broken piano. The vibration traveled through his fingers, up his arms, deep into his chest. It felt like the piano was breathing with him. He played another note, then another. Slowly at first, testing the feel of the keys. The sound filled the hall gently, floating through the air. People stopped whispering. A few leaned forward. He played a simple melody he had created at home, one he always wished sounded better. On this piano, it felt alive. The boy didn't rush. He let every note settle in the air. His fingers moved with care, not because he was nervous, but because he respected every sound the piano gave. Him. The stagehand watched him with surprise. The managers. Amused smiles slowly disappeared. The musicians who had laughed earlier grew quiet. The boy kept playing, forgetting the crowd, forgetting the humiliation he had felt. In that moment, it was just him and the piano. Finally, a complete piano, not a broken one. He felt as if he could breathe properly after holding his breath for years. The melody grew a little stronger, a little fuller. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a performance meant for applause. It was simply honest. And because it was honest, it touched something inside the people listening. The hall, once filled with whispers and laughter, became completely still. The boy's fingers slowed, and he played the last soft note. The sound lingered in the air before fading. He lifted his hands from the keys and looked down, unsure if he had done well or embarrassed himself. He didn't dare look up at the crowd, but the silence he heard wasn't mockery. It was awe, and he had no idea yet how much this one moment, this one tiny chance he fought for, was about to change his life. The boy sat frozen on the bench, unsure of what to do next. His hands rested lightly on his lap, and his heart still beat fast from the moment he had just lived through. The hall was completely silent, almost unnaturally so. For a second, he wondered if he had made a mistake. If maybe no one spoke because they didn't know how to. Tell him he sounded terrible. He slowly lifted his eyes. What he saw surprised him. The people who had been whispering now stared at him with a different expression. Their faces were softer, their eyes more focused. A few of the musicians who had laughed earlier now stood with their arms hanging loosely at their sides, as if they had forgotten what they were holding. Even the manager, who had crossed his arms tightly just moments ago, now looked a little unsure. The stagehand, the only person who had defended him, stepped forward with a small smile. "You did well," he said quietly. The boy nodded without speaking, still unsure how to react. But then a voice from the back of the hall called out, "Where did you learn to play like that?" The boy turned toward the sound. It came from a musician holding a clarinet. He looked truly curious, not sarcastic. The boy shifted on the bench. I taught myself," he whispered. "On that broken piano you mentioned?" The stagehand asked. The boy nodded again. Yes. More whispers traveled through the crowd, but these were different. They weren't mocking anymore. They carried something like surprise, maybe even a little respect. One of the violin players took a step forward. "You play with feeling," she said simply. "Not everyone can do that." The boy felt heat rise to his cheeks. He didn't know how to respond to praise. He wasn't used to it. The manager finally spoke, clearing his throat. "All right, that's enough. The rehearsal will start soon." He looked at the boy, and for a moment, the usual sharpness in his expression faded. "You should head out now." The boy stood up quickly, not wanting to cause trouble. He stepped down from the stage and walked toward the side exit. His steps were small and careful. He didn't want to make noise. The hall seemed too important for loud footsteps, but as he walked past the stagehand, the man placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Wait a second," he said. "Come with me." The boy followed him out of the hall, unsure what was happening. They entered a quiet corridor that led to the backstage area. The boy looked around at the cables, sound equipment, and stacked chairs. Everything seemed so organized and neat that he didn't know where to put his hands. He held them in front of him, trying to appear calm. The stagehand finally stopped near a door that led to a small break room. "Sit," he said kindly. The boy sat on a metal chair while the stagehand pulled up another one across from him. "You play well," the man said. "Really well." "Thank you," the boy whispered. "How long have you been playing?" The boy thought for a moment. "A little more than 3 years." "And before that? Did you learn anywhere?" He shook his head. "No, I only started when I found the old piano. No one used it. It was missing keys, but the ones left still worked enough to make sound. I would go there after school." The stagehand nodded, listening closely. "So you taught yourself?" "Yes." The boy looked down at his hands. "I tried to fix it sometimes, but I don't know how to fix pianos. I just tried to make it sound a little better." The stagehand leaned back in his chair, folding his arms casually. "That explains the way you play." The boy blinked. "What do you mean?" "You're used to working with broken sound," the stagehand said. "You learn to feel the notes instead of depending on perfect keys. People who learn on broken things learn differently. They learn to listen harder." The boy didn't know if that was a compliment, but it felt like one. The door opened suddenly, and the manager stepped in. His expression was more serious again, but something small had changed in his eyes. "You can't just pull him backstage," the manager said to the stagehand. "He's not allowed back here." "He's not causing trouble," the stagehand replied calmly. "That's not the point," the manager said. "There are rules." The stagehand shrugged. Sometimes exceptions help more than rules. The manager looked at the boy. For a moment, the boy thought he would be told to leave again. He sat up straighter, ready to nod and walk out without arguing. But instead, the manager asked, "How old are you?" 12, the boy said softly. 12? The manager raised an eyebrow. "You play like someone older." The boy didn't know if that was good or bad, so he stayed quiet. The manager sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Look, what you did out there surprised people. We're not used to anyone walking in and asking to play. Most people need special permission." "I'm sorry," the boy said quickly. "I didn't mean to break rules. I just wanted to try the piano. I won't do it again." The manager lowered his hand. "I didn't say you shouldn't come again." The boy blinked. Confused, the stagehand smirked, as if he had expected this. The manager continued, "This hall sometimes holds open community days. Anyone can sign up to use the stage for a short time. If you come then, you can legally play the piano. No one will laugh. No one will stop you." The boy nodded slowly. "When is that?" "Next month." A whole month. That felt like a long time. He didn't know if he could wait that long. The sound of the piano still echoed in his mind, warm and clean. He wanted to hear it again. He wanted to feel the keys under his fingers. Until then, the manager added, you shouldn't just walk in asking to play. Today was unusual. The boy lowered his eyes. "I understand." The stagehand leaned forward. "But listen," he said gently. "This place isn't the only place you can grow. Music is everywhere. You don't need perfect tools to learn. But when you get a chance to use them, grab it. Today, you grabbed it." The boy felt something warm fill his chest. He nodded, "Thank you." The manager glanced at the clock. "All right, rehearsals are starting. We need to clear the area." The boy stood up, pulling his backpack onto his shoulder. Before leaving, he looked again at the stagehand. "Thank you for letting me try," he said. The stagehand smiled. "You earned that minute." The boy walked through the halls slowly, taking one last look at the posters, the bright floor, the shining lights. Every step felt lighter than before, even though he knew he was going back to his everyday life. The broken piano, the crowded apartment buildings, the noise of the streets. But now something was different inside him. He stepped outside, and the cold air touched his face. The sky was darker now, and streetlights flickered on one by one. He walked down the steps of the music hall with a small smile. People passed by without noticing him, but he didn't mind. He didn't need anyone to notice. Not yet. As he walked home, he kept replaying the sound of the real piano in his mind. The warmth, the softness, the way the notes floated in the air like feathers. He remembered the silence that followed, not the silence of judgment, but the silence of people who didn't know what to say because their hearts had been touched by something unexpected. For the first time in a long while, the boy felt something close to hope. He reached the block with the old community room. The broken piano still sat there, as it always did. He walked in quietly and sat down on the same old bench. the wood rough and uneven beneath him. He placed his fingers on the chipped keys, and for the first time ever, the broken piano didn't feel like a limitation dot. It felt like a beginning. He played the same melody he had played on the grand piano, and though the sound was dull and uneven, he felt the beauty inside it now. He understood the notes better. He understood himself a little better, too. He played until the sun disappeared completely and the room grew dark. But he didn't stop Dot because in his heart, he knew something important got today was only the start. And life was about to open doors he never knew existed. Asterisk. The next morning, the boy woke up earlier than usual. The sky outside the window was still a pale gray, the sun not fully out yet. His room was small and quiet, but inside his mind, the memory of yesterday still played like a vivid movie. Every moment replayed itself, the laughter, the doubt, the way the hall had gone silent when he touched the keys, and the warm sound of the piano that had surprised even him. He lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. It felt unreal, like a dream he wasn't ready to wake from. But it had been real. He had touched the piano. He had played it. And people had listened. He slowly sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The old wooden floor creaked beneath his feet. His backpack lay leaning against the small table, the notebook still inside. He reached for it, opened it, and looked at the scribbled notes he had written over the years, tiny drawings of keys, shapes of melodies, lines he didn't always understand, but tried to copy from memory. Many pages were crumpled, some stained by rain or dirty hands, but every mark held a piece of his journey. He ran his finger along the lines of one of his favorite melodies. Suddenly, he wanted to hear it again, not on the broken piano, but the way he had heard it yesterday, rich and full, but he had no choice. The grand piano was far from his reach now. What he had experienced was a gift, a moment, not something he could repeat so easily. He closed the notebook and stood up Dot after getting ready. He walked quietly out of the apartment. The streets were still half asleep, the shops closed, the cars moving slowly. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself as a cold breeze brushed past him. It was going to be a long day, but he didn't mind. His heart felt strangely light. Before heading to school, he stopped by the old community room. The door creaked as he pushed it open. The broken piano sat in the same place, dusty, uneven, and still waiting for him. He walked up to it, slid his fingers across the damaged keys, and pressed one. A dull note came out. He pressed another. Then another dot. It wasn't beautiful, but it was familiar. It felt like home. He played quietly for a few minutes, trying to bring back the feeling he had felt inside the grand hall. But the sound was too different. No matter how hard he tried, it didn't match the smoothness he remembered. He wasn't disappointed, but the longing in his chest grew stronger. Eventually, he had to leave for school all day. He couldn't focus. He wasn't a bad student, but he often struggled to pay attention. Today was worse. His mind drifted every few minutes, wandering back to the memory of the hall, the piano, the silence that had followed. When his teacher asked him a question, he didn't even hear it until the class burst into soft laughter. He lowered his head, embarrassed, but the teacher didn't scold him. She simply asked him to meet her after class. When school ended, he stayed behind while the other students rushed out in groups, laughing and talking loudly. He packed his worn-out bag slowly, wondering if he was in trouble. The teacher approached him gently. "Are you all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, you were quiet today." "I'm always quiet," he said softly. She smiled a little. Today felt different. "You seemed far away." He hesitated, unsure if he should tell her. But something in her tone made him feel safe enough to speak. "I played a piano yesterday," he said. "A real one." At the big music hall, the teacher's eyes widened slightly. Really? How did that happen? He explained briefly, leaving out the embarrassing parts. He told her about seeing the piano, about wanting to try it, about how he finally got the chance. He didn't mention the laughter or the doubts, because he didn't want her to worry. "That sounds amazing," she said sincerely. "How did it feel?" He looked down, trying to find the right word. "Different," he finally whispered. "Like something inside me woke up." The teacher nodded slowly. "You must keep going. You have a gift. Don't let it fade." He didn't know if he had a gift. He only knew he loved the piano more than anything. After school, he walked home slowly. The city was louder now, with people rushing in every direction. Cars honked, vendors shouted, but none of it distracted him from the thoughts swirling inside him. When he reached his block, he didn't go straight home. He went to the community room again. The piano waited, like always. He sat down and began to play. This time, he didn't care about how dull the sound was. He focused on the feeling. He played the same melody again and again, slowly shaping it, letting the memory of the real piano guide his fingers. He imagined the warm sound in his head, hoped for it, reached for it. An old woman who lived nearby walked past the open doorway and stopped to listen. She had heard him play before. Today, she listened longer. "You're getting better," she said softly. He looked up, surprised. "Really?" She nodded. "I may be old, but my hearing still works." She smiled and continued walking. Her words made him smile too. He played until his fingers grew tired. Then he rested his hands on the keys, staring at the piano with a feeling of quiet affection. This old instrument had taught him everything. Even broken, it had given him a place to escape, a place to dream, a place to feel alive. But now he wanted to grow. He wanted to learn more. And he knew he couldn't do that alone. As he walked home for dinner, he couldn't stop thinking about the music hall. The stagehand's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes exceptions help more than rules. And the manager's last sentence replayed too. "You didn't do badly." He wondered if they still remembered him. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake listening to the quiet sounds of the apartment building footsteps, distant voices, the wind brushing past the windows. He thought about what he wanted from life. He didn't want money. He didn't want fame. He didn't dream of big houses or fancy clothes. He only wanted one thing. He wanted to play, and he wanted to get better. The next day after school, he did something he had never done before. He walked back to the music hall. He stood at the steps again, nervous but determined. The building looked even more intimidating this time, knowing he wasn't invited. But he took a deep breath and went inside. The same woman was at the front desk. She looked at him and raised an eyebrow. "You again?" He swallowed. I'm not here to play. I just want to talk to someone." "To who?" "The stagehand," he said. "The one who helped me." She paused, thinking. "He's working today. Wait here." She walked away, leaving him alone in the lobby. People came and went, barely glancing at him this time. He clutched his backpack tightly, afraid he'd be asked to leave. After a few minutes, the stagehand appeared from a side hallway. When he saw the boy, he smiled. "You're back," he said. "Everything okay?" The boy nodded. "I wanted to thank you again. For yesterday." "You already did," the stagehand said. "But I appreciate it. I also wanted to ask something," the boy said quietly. "Go ahead." The boy took a breath. "Do you think it's possible for someone like me to learn real music? Like properly learn? With a teacher?" The stagehand studied him carefully, seeing the mix of hope and fear in his eyes. "Yes," he said simply. "It's possible. But I can't pay," the boy whispered. I don't have money. Money isn't the only way, the stagehand replied. Sometimes people help when they see someone trying. The boy's heart beat faster. Do you know anyone who can teach me? The stagehand didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for the boy to follow him. They walked down a long corridor, passing practice rooms where musicians tuned their instruments. The boy listened to the sounds coming from behind the doors, scales, warm-ups, soft melodies. He felt like he was walking through a world he didn't belong in, but desperately wanted to join. They reached a small office, where an older woman sat reviewing papers. She looked experienced, with calm eyes and a firm posture. The stagehand whispered something to her. She looked at the boy, then back at the stagehand, then at the boy again. Play something for me, she said. The boy froze. Here? She nodded. The stagehand gestured toward a small upright piano in the corner of her office. The boy approached it slowly. It wasn't as perfect as the grand piano, but it was worlds better than his broken one. He sat down, placed his fingers on the keys, and hesitated. His heart raced. What if he messed up? What if she laughed? What if she said he wasn't good enough? But he remembered the silence in the hall. He remembered the warm sound. And he remembered the old woman saying, "You're getting better, Dot." So he played. Not loudly, not perfectly, but honestly. The room grew quiet. When he finished, the older woman folded her hands and leaned back. You learned this on a broken piano? She asked. He nodded nervously. She exchanged a look with the stagehand. Finally, she said, You have something. It's small, but it's real. And it can grow. The boy felt a lump in his throat. Come next week, she said. I'll give you your first lesson. He stared at her in disbelief. Really? She nodded once. But you must work harder than anyone else. Nothing will be easy. I will, the boy whispered. I promise. As he walked out of the music hall, the world looked different. The streets felt brighter, the sky wider, the air lighter. He wasn't just a boy with a broken piano anymore. For the first time in his life, he wasn't walking toward something. He was walking into something, a beginning he had never imagined. The moment the young man's hands touched the old piano, something inside him felt both familiar and frightening. He had played this same model before years ago, when life was different, when he still believed he had a future. Now, standing in the middle of that grand hall, with all the wealthy guests staring at him, he felt every emotion returning at once. The pressure, the hope, the memories he had buried for so long. He sat down slowly, almost unsure if he should really do this. The piano felt uneven, some keys stiff, others too loose. It was exactly as the hall manager had said, a forgotten instrument kept only for decoration. He ran his fingertips across the keys. Dust clung to his skin, but he didn't mind. Music didn't care about dust or rust. Music simply needed a heart behind it. Behind him, the guests whispered again. Some were bored. Some were curious. A few were annoyed that their evening was being slowed down by someone they believed didn't belong here. But he ignored all of it. This moment wasn't about them. It was about the feeling that had been silent inside him for too long. The hall lights were warm and bright, bouncing off the shiny floors, but all he could see was the piano. He breathed in deeply, letting the sound of people fade away. He placed both hands on the keys and closed his eyes. For a second, everything was still. Even the waiter holding the tray near the door stopped moving. Even the soft clinking of glasses went quiet. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft and shaky, almost lost in the size of the room. He felt the weakness of the piano immediately, but he adjusted. His fingers found a way to pull emotion out of the tired strings. He played slowly at first, almost timid, like someone testing if they were allowed to breathe. But as the melody formed, something inside him opened, and the room began to feel different. The whispers behind him started to fade. The chatter died down. A few people turned to look more closely. Some lifted their heads from their conversations, confused by the unexpected beauty rising from such an old instrument. He played a tune he had created long ago, one that had no name but carried every part of his journey. It was the sound of fear, hope, hunger, kindness, loss, and courage all wrapped together. Each note held a memory. Each chord carried a piece of his heart. He didn't worry about impressing anyone. He didn't think about judgment or embarrassment. He just played the truth he had carried with him for years. A soft gasp came from somewhere behind him. Someone else whispered, "Is he really doing this on that piano?" Another voice said, "This doesn't make sense. How can it sound like that?" But their words didn't touch him. The music had taken full control now. As he played, he remembered the nights he slept in shelters, the days he worked odd jobs, the mornings he walked around looking for food or a place to rest. He remembered the laughter of people who didn't believe he could rise again. He remembered the few who showed him small kindness. All those moments shaped the music flowing out of him. His fingers moved faster, dancing across the keys with confidence he almost forgot he had. The broken piano pushed back, but he pushed harder. He coaxed every possible sound from it. Every emotion he had held back for years poured out into the room. The guests were no longer whispering. They were silent, completely silent. Some stood up slowly, as if afraid to make noise. A few people put their drinks down carefully, not wanting the sound of glass to disturb the moment. Even the workers around the hall paused what they were doing. For the first time that night, everyone was united not by wealth, not by status, not by pride, but by the sound of one young man telling his story through music. He felt tears forming behind his eyelids, but he didn't let them fall. He just kept playing, pouring everything he had into each note near the back. The hall manager who had laughed at him earlier stood frozen. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open. He had expected a joke, a failed performance, anything but this. But what he was hearing was something he had no control over, something far beyond his imagination. The wealthy guests who had laughed earlier were now quietly stunned. A few looked embarrassed. Others looked emotional. The melody reached corners of the room music had never touched before. Someone whispered, How did we not see this?" Another murmured, "I've never heard anything like this. Not even from trained performers." Yet the young man wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't thinking about applause. He didn't even think about whether the crowd liked it or not. Right now, he felt like he was talking to life itself, telling it he hadn't given up, that he still had a voice. Even if the world had ignored it for years, the music rose higher, more powerful, filling every inch of the hall. The old piano seemed to come alive under his hands. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a partner, helping him speak words he could never say out loud. A woman in the front slowly placed her hand over her mouth, surprised at how emotional she suddenly felt. Another wiped a tear she didn't expect. It wasn't the kind of music people clapped for politely. It was the kind that touched something deep inside. When the melody reached its softest point, the room felt almost weightless. It was as if time had paused, not just for him, but for everyone. People leaned forward without realizing it. They didn't want to miss a single note. His fingers slowed down. The music grew gentler, lighter, like the last breath of the story that had finally been told. He didn't rush the final notes. He let them fall carefully, one by one, until the room felt like it was holding its breath. And then he stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was so strong, it felt like a blanket covering the entire hall. For a few seconds, it seemed as if even the air refused to shift. The young man kept his hands on the keys, breathing quietly, unsure of what would happen next. He didn't turn around. He wasn't sure he wanted to see their faces. He wasn't sure he wanted to see judgment or pity. But what followed wasn't judgment. It wasn't laughter. It wasn't mockery. It was a long, stunned silence that said everything. People were speechless, completely shaken. He could feel it in the stillness behind him. Finally, someone took a small breath. Then another. A soft, shaky sigh came from somewhere in the back. It was the kind of silence that appears only when something unexpected, something deeply moving has happened. Even the hall manager, who had been so confident earlier, stood still as if he had forgotten how to speak. The young man lifted his hands from the piano slowly, almost afraid of breaking the moment. His heart was pounding. He didn't know what people were thinking. He didn't know if they would react kindly or harshly. But he knew one thing. He had played honestly. He had shown them who he was. And the room had listened, truly listened. The silence continued, heavy and emotional. He swallowed hard, wondering what the next moment would bring. Wondering if all of this had been worth it. Wondering if this was the start of something, or just a rare moment that would fade. He waited for anyone to speak, but no one did. Not yet. For a long moment, the young man stayed seated at the piano. His hands rested on his lap, trembling lightly, and he didn't dare turn around. The silence from the crowd felt almost too large, too heavy, like the whole room was holding one single breath. He could hear nothing but his heartbeat, rushing fast in his chest. After everything that had happened in his life, after all the doors that had closed on him, he had learned not to expect applause or praise. So he sat there quietly, waiting for whatever came next. Then, finally, someone clapped. It was a single pair of hands at first, soft and unsure. Then another joined, and another. Soon the sound grew louder, stronger, spreading across the hall like a wave. People stood up slowly, almost in disbelief at themselves, as if they weren't sure whether they were allowed to show admiration for someone they had judged so quickly. The young man blinked, surprised. He lifted his head slightly. The sound grew until the entire hall was filled with applause, real applause, not polite or forced. Some guests clapped with both hands raised. Some clapped with tears in their eyes. A few had their heads lowered, their faces full of regret. He slowly rose from the bench. His legs felt weak, but he stood anyway. When he turned around, he saw something he never expected. The very people who had laughed at him earlier were now giving him a standing ovation. His throat tightened. He didn't know how to react. He wasn't used to praise. He couldn't remember the last time he saw so many people looking at him with respect. Near the front, a woman stepped forward. She looked at him with such sincerity that his chest tightened again. "That was beautiful," she said quietly, loud enough for others to hear. "I've been coming to this event for years, and I don't think I've ever heard something so honest." Another guest nodded. "You played from the heart. You didn't just perform, you told a story." Someone else added, "How did we not know you had this talent?" The hall manager, the one who had laughed at him earlier and called him a nuisance, walked toward him slowly. There was no anger or pride left on his face this time. Only embarrassment and something like respect. He stopped in front of the young man and lowered his gaze for a moment. I misjudged you," he said, his voice cracking just slightly. "That was remarkable. I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did." The young man didn't know what to say. Apologies weren't something he expected from people like this. He didn't want to embarrass anyone or make them feel worse. He nodded gently, trying to show there were no hard feelings, but the moment wasn't over. A man in a simple suit, standing near the middle of the crowd, stepped forward with purpose. He wasn't dressed like the others. He didn't wear expensive jewelry or a dramatic outfit. He looked like someone who didn't need to prove anything. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, addressing the room, "but I need to ask something important." He turned to the young man. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The young man hesitated. He didn't want to talk about his past, not in front of all these people. But the man seemed sincere, so he answered honestly, "I learned when I was younger, before things got difficult. I used to play a lot, but life took me in another direction." The man studied him carefully. "Do you still want to play professionally?" The young man looked down, unsure how to respond. "I don't know," he admitted. "I haven't thought about it in a long time." The man smiled, a warm, unforced smile. "Well, I think you should think about it again." He paused, then added, "My team organizes musical events across the city. We're always looking for raw talent, real talent. People who play with emotion, not ego. If you're interested, I'd like to talk to you more." The crowd murmured, impressed. A few people nodded in agreement. Even those who had doubted him before seemed eager to see where this could go. The young man was stunned. He didn't know what to say. Opportunities like this didn't come to people like him. Not after everything he had been through. Not after years of trying to survive, wondering if his dreams had died quietly somewhere along the way. I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You don't have to say anything now," the man replied gently. "Just don't turn away from something you clearly love." The young man felt a warmth spreading through him, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Before he could respond, a soft voice spoke from the side. "May I say something?" Everyone turned toward an elderly guest, someone who had been sitting quietly the entire evening. He had a calm presence, the kind of man people listen to without being told to. He leaned slightly on a cane as he stepped forward. "I've lived a long time," he said softly, "and I've heard many musicians. Some were skilled, some were famous, some were loud and impressive. But what you played tonight—" He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "That was the kind of music that only comes from someone who has lived through real struggle and still found beauty inside it." The young man swallowed hard, not expecting words like that. The elderly man continued, "Don't ever let this gift go again. The world needs musicians like you people who remind us what humanity sounds like." The room fell silent again. This time, out of respect, the young man felt something inside him shift. A feeling he had forgotten, a sense of purpose. Maybe he really did have something left to give. Maybe life had been waiting for him to find his way back to the one thing that made him feel whole. The applause began again, softer this time but deeper, filled with genuine emotion. People weren't cheering for a show. They were cheering for his courage, his resilience, his heart. He took a small step away from the piano and felt dozens of warm eyes following him, not with judgment, but with admiration. A few people approached him, offering kind words, shaking his hand, thanking him for playing. Some asked if he had more music, more stories hidden in his heart. Others asked if he would perform at their events. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible, a worker from the hall. Someone who had seen him earlier when he was pushed away, walked up quietly and whispered, "You showed them. You showed all of us." There was no envy in his tone, only respect. As the night continued, people kept coming to him, each offering something: compliments, encouragement, opportunities. But what mattered most was not what they offered. It was how they looked at him now. They didn't see a burden or a stranger. They didn't see someone undeserving of standing in their presence. They saw a musician, a storyteller, a person with worth. When the event was finally winding down, the man in the simple suit returned to him. "Take this," he said, handing him a small card. Call me whenever you're ready. There's a place for someone like you in the world of music." His tone was genuine, almost hopeful. The young man held the card carefully, as if it were something fragile. "Thank you," he said softly. "No," the man smiled. "Thank you." When the hall finally emptied and only a few workers remained, the young man walked back to the piano. He placed his hand on it gently, almost like saying goodbye to an old friend. This piano had given him a moment he would never forget. It had given him a chance to speak without words. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling lighter than he had in years. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if success was waiting or if new struggles would come. But he knew one thing clearly. He wasn't alone anymore. And his talent wasn't forgotten. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, the city lights shimmered around him. The streets were quiet, the breeze gentle. He felt different, not because the world had changed, but because something inside him had finally awakened. He walked forward slowly, carrying nothing but a small card in his pocket and a heart full of hope. For the first time, he believed there might be a future waiting for him, one he had thought disappeared long ago. And somewhere behind him, inside that grand hall, the old piano sat silently once again. But it was no longer just a decoration. It had been a witness, a partner, a reminder that even forgotten things, people or pianos, could still create something beautiful when given a chance. The night felt calm. The young man took one last look at the building before turning away. He didn't know exactly where life would lead him now, but he knew this. He would never be afraid to touch a piano again. And the people who once laughed at him would never forget the night the Destitute piano silenced them all.